Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the November ASV Monthly Meeting. This month, we will be hearing talks from Ken Lamarkland, on the section, who is the section director for the New Astronomers Group. Ken will be talking about New Astronomers Group and an overview on beginners telescopes. Following this, we will have a talk from Paul Litchin, who is the Astrophotography section director, who will be discussing beginners astrophotography. Following this, Perry will show us what's happening in the November night sky. But first, let's bring in the president, Mr. Steve Patty. Good evening, Steve.
Thank you, Mark. Welcome to another live stream, and I've got a few announcements. The LMDSS is now open for Melburnians to travel up to it on the selected days, and they will be advertised on our webpage. And if you want to check to see what the restrictions are, please do so before you nominate your availability and travel up there. The club rooms at Burwood, well, the lodge, sorry, Perry, the lodge, remain closed until further notice, and section meetings will be only via Zoom. I hope everyone's been enjoying the live streams of our virtual star parties. The Christmas barbecue is most likely going to be a virtual one with a live component from LMDSS, but that's yet to be decided at the next council meeting. So look for those announcements. And at this point, I'd like to share my screen and get the new members up. Okay, what's going on?
There we go. You should have left it on there, Steve.
Well, it's not in the Chrome tab. It should have been there. All right, let's do it the other way.
Oh, here we go. I've got it. It's here now. Do you want to open it up, your PDF? Good evening, Neil. Good evening, Lee. A couple of people popping comments in the chat section. I've just got your email open at the moment, Steve. Do you want me to get it open for you? I've got a copy of it.
Well, I've got it open now. So are you reading it?
Yeah, I can't see it. I can see all of your email, though, which I won't put on the screen.
Okay.
Yeah,
well,
you have to share the file. I'll get it up for you. If you want to have just a chat for a second, I'll get it up right now.
Okay. Well, Mark's going to put up the new members. We've got 27 new members that have joined the society since our last meeting. For those new members, I want to welcome you here. And unfortunately, we can't have a one-on-one at our section meetings, but please look at the ASV website and go into the Zoom section under the members tab and look for the sections which are actually broadcasting live. So if we could get that blown up a little bit, please, Mark.
Yep. There we go.
Okay. I'm not going to read them out, but if your name's there, if you'd like to slowly scroll down, well, I welcome you, and I hope that your experience with the ASV is a long and fruitful one. The main key is to ask questions. No questions dumb. We all started as rank amateurs, and seriously, if you want to get the most enjoyment, you've got to ask questions. So look at the sort of sections that we do have and get in contact with the section director and throw all your questions to them. All right, that's enough of me. I think now, Mark, we can start with the presentation for tonight.
The first one. Good evening, Ken.
Good day, Mark. Steve.
Thank you, Ken.
Okay, so I'm the section director of the New Astronomer Group. We meet on the third Wednesday night of every month from 7:30 to 10 o'clock, and they're on Zoom meetings. So any member can come and join in our section meetings. So I've got two parts to the presentation tonight, a quick talk about what the New Astronomer Group is. And then we're going to talk about the beginner telescope. Is there such a thing? So we'll walk through that. So I'll switch over to my meeting. Can everyone see that now?
Yeah, we can see your presentation.
Cool. Okay, so I've got 20 odd slides. So there's a number of slides, but they're all quick. So we'll just keep moving through. Why isn't it fancy?
Ken, you'll need to go into your PowerPoint and just roll through your slides. It'll move on the screen automatically.
So I've just done that. We are on the second slide now.
Yes, we are. Yes.
Yep, cool. So the New Astronomers Group is an introduction to astronomy. It's a 12-month course, and it combines some amateur astronomy, the science of astronomy, and the history of astronomy. And we have 12 different topics each year. To help with the amateur astronomy side, we have a novice observing program, and that's to learn the 36 brightest stars in the sky and the surround, so the constellations they're in and some of the faint fuzzy objects that are in those constellations. It's really important because even if you have a computerized telescope, you can't just rely on the computer to do everything, because the first thing it's going to do is ask you to point to a bright star. So if you know the 36 brightest ones, it's going to make it a whole lot easier to use your computerized scope. And of course, if you're just doing planisphere, sky chart, horizon map, that's going to come in really handy, because they're the bright signposts in the sky that point the way to the constellations and the objects within them. We've started work on a rookie program, and this will start next year. And this is going to be the first 60 objects to find with a telescope. Now, we're not going to bang, bang, bang roll out 12 in that first 2021. We'll probably do 4, and we'll be getting feedback on how people see that working, and we're all about feedback to make it better, because the more people that comment, it gets better along. So that's something to watch out for next year, and I'll probably link up with the Deep Sky and have a chat with them as well. The best way to hook into the New Astronomer Group is to join the ASV email group. So go log into the ASV website with your membership credentials, go to the email group and set on your preference for New Astronomer Group to on. And next time I send out an email, you'll get the Zoom meetings and you'll get a copy of the PDF course notes that we have each month delivered to your inbox, so you can read them in the days before the meeting and hopefully have some good questions. Now, we've changed, for those that know the New Astronomer Group, as having to wait for an intake and getting an A4 folder with printed notes. Well, that's all changed. The A4 folders were stopped, so we can move to a zero cost, and then everyone can just come along to the section meeting just like anyone else, and we provide them via PDF, and then you can put them on your device or use your laptop. It just so happened that it was a very timely move to do that with the COVID and the Zoom meetings. So we're building a website to move everything online, so you'll be able to get your course notes and a number of other things from the website. And I'm looking for any suggestions or feedback on that website. So I'll do a quick demonstration of that, Mark, but I'd probably have to swap applications and hold everything up. So we might do that at the end of the talk.
You probably will, but yeah, if you want to do that at
we'll
the
do that.
end, we've also got some people. We've also got some people who are probably going to line up with some questions for you at the end as well.
I've got a slide for that. But there is the website www.asvnag.info, so you can go have a look at that now, because most people will be online. So, beginner telescope. One of the most frequent questions I get in my inbox or at the meetings is, which telescope should I buy? Which begs the question, is there really such a thing as a beginner telescope? Just like Mythbusters, is that busted, plausible or confirmed? Well, we're going to find out tonight. See what you think. From The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams, according to Slarty Barfast, one of the interesting things about space is how dull it is. Staggeringly so, bewilderingly so. You see, there's so much space and there's so little in it. We could quote some statistics, but they too are quite sensationally dull. Well, there's some news from 1609, just in, a new invention called a looker, which is what we now call a telescope. But looker, I think, there was a Dutch name for a looker, which was the first name for a telescope. So that makes it really exciting again, because now we can go look close up at things in the sky. And in the intervening 400 years of the telescope, we've learned a lot about where we live in our solar system, among our planets, all the nearby stars, that we live in a galaxy, and ultimately there's a evolution to the whole universe. And this has all been made possible by the invention of the telescope. So the best tool to look at our universe is the backyard telescope, because we don't have spaceships yet. And we're all waiting for the aliens to arrive and give us a little tour out to Saturn for the weekend in exchange for some lodge and boarding, because they've come a long way and they've run out of food and whatever else they need. So I'm just going to talk about visual telescopes, so beginner telescopes, just looking through, because Paul's going to talk about astrophotography. 2 years ago, I was asked to give a talk ending in a supposition that the Dobsonian telescope was the best option for a beginner telescope. And I was happy to give that talk, because that is really good advice, that Dobsonian telescope is hard to beat. But this time I'm going to put on my section director hat, and we're going to break down what makes a good beginner telescope, rather than just starting with an answer of a Dobsonian, because it's not always the telescope that everyone wants. I talk to a lot of the new members through the new Astronomer Group, and I get comments like, well, I bought a computerized telescope because I live in a city and it's really hard to find the constellations, but I can see the bright stars. So I set up the computerized scope and find the bright stars. It locks on and it can actually find objects I can't see through my finder scope, and I can see them in the telescope. So that's an interesting comment, that they need the computer in the inner city to see anything at all, because it'd be hard pressed to start off from inner city. It's hard enough for me out in the outer suburbs to do that, but it's what we do. So from a pragmatic point of view, regardless of the make and models, all those things, what is a beginner telescope? So let's go with a definition. It meets these things. It's easy to set up. It's easy to use. It gives good views of all the main objects that you start with looking at in the first few years. It's easy to transport and it's not too expensive. So let's flick through each one of these in a bit of detail and work out, because if next time you're cruising online, looking through the telescope stores, this is going to give you some questions to ask yourself about the sort of telescope you want. So when you look at all the different scopes, rather than make, model, which one, of course, price is always a guide, but this will hopefully give you some ideas about a beginner telescope. So easy things. When I first heard of the term deep sky, it really amused me, and this is when I first came into the ASV. So I quickly doodled my thoughts of what a deep sky might be, and I made a little cartoon. I think I put it in Crux at the time about deep sky. So Heathcote is a lake, and we're going deep. Okay, let's go through them one by one. So easy to set up. That means the first time you get it out of the box, it's not too befuddling to set up. Now, one of the interesting things is when you're online, go looking for the PDF instruction manual. There's even online videos sometimes, and that often tells you a lot of things about the scope that aren't in the glossy brochures and the sales pitch. So it'll tell you things about the scope that you're going to have to do when you're setting up or doing alignments if you buy that telescope, and you can compare between telescopes. So it'll give you a bit of a leg up on what they're like to use. But don't get too daunted about the setup, because once you've done it, 10 times, you're going to be much better at it. And it's always help within the ASV for that. But the main idea is the quicker and easier your scope is to set up, the more often you're going to get it out for observing. If it takes you an hour to set up your telescope, I reckon you may only do it now and then, whereas if it takes 5 or 10 minutes, you're much more likely to get it out to observe. Less is often more when you're setting up a telescope. So if you have a complicated setup with a large number of accessories and that you've got to attach and add on and align, and it just makes it harder and harder to set up. So you've got to think about, it's a challenge just to get out there and find things in the sky the first time. So let's make the first telescope simple to set up, simple to use. Some people like to have their telescope set up permanently, and they put a nice cover over it to keep the dust and whatever out, the dew maybe. So you still keep it indoors or in your garage, but a little trolley where you can just wheel it out, it's all set up, and you just lift the cover up and away you go. So people do that. So early on, you just want to get out and observe and find your first objects. You're going to be looking for the brightest objects to start with, so the moon, the planets. Find the brightest stars in the constellations and look for the objects that are around those. So my recommendation is just have an Alt-Az telescope, which just means it moves up, down, left, right. So it's simple to use. There's no equatorial angle in there that's making it difficult to use, or you've got to do some sort of alignment. So an equatorial mount that has hand drive controls, and you've got to do a polar alignment before you can find anything. It can just be a really difficult start that just holds you back from finding stuff in the sky. You just want to find stuff when you start. Learning how to align the equatorial mount, get it level, and do your star alignment, that's something you can do later. When you start thinking about doing automated tracking, or if you want go-to capability, and I'm sure Paul will talk about that in astrophotography. So just learn how to find stuff in the sky, get used to looking at different types of objects, open clusters, globular clusters, galaxies, planetary nebula, what they all look like, small ones, bright ones, the variety of what's in the sky. Oops, sorry. One of the tips when you've got a new scope, can be really hard. You go out and in the dark trying to find things, and it's got these little controls on it, or maybe you've got setting circles, or you can't see your eyepieces in the dark. So why not have a go during the day? And the moon is a really good object to look at, because you've got to find the moon, and then it's moving with the rotation of the Earth. So you've got to chase it through the telescope. You've got to keep the movement happening. And you can see all your accessories and your filters and your different eyepieces, and everything's visible without having that dim red torch challenge of where things are. So you can see everything. It makes it simple. Just make sure you set your telescope up in the shade, because you don't want to accidentally be looking through and turn a telescope you're not sure how to use yet, and you glance across the sun. So just set up in the shade to take that risk away from having this scope outside in the daylight. Offers good views. So you don't want a tiny little telescope that's too small and doesn't show you too much. You want a decent size, 4 inches and bigger. All telescopes do two things. They capture more light than the eye can, and they magnify the view. And that's exactly what astronomers need, because everything we look at just about is small and faint. So magnify and make things brighter. It does two things. It makes faint things that we can barely see brighter, and it makes things we can't see at all visible. So if you think about looking at the moon, when you look up the moon, and you may have seen this in the Apollo 13 movie, if you hold your thumb out in front of the moon, you can block the moon with your fingernail, your thumbnail. So you can imagine drawing a picture of the moon on your thumbnail. Now that's not very big. You're not going to see a lot of detail. But with magnification, you're going to blow that up to about the size of holding a pizza box in your hand and being able to see all the wonderful detail in a pizza box size view rather than a thumbnail view. Now the other really important thing is having a mount that holds the view steady, so the wind doesn't shake it, or you let it go and it drops down, or it pulls back. And when you move the telescope, it moves nice and smoothly. So it doesn't go jerky, wobbly. It keeps it nice and smooth. So you don't want sticky motions or anything like that. And off to the right-hand side here, we've got a shot of Arthur Coombs' Dobsonian telescope. Now he wrote up some material for the ASV's Amateur Telescope Making Guide, which is downloadable from the ASV website, and this is the picture from that guide. And you can see that's a nice sturdy mount. It's got big axis, so you haven't got a tiny little, it's not all turning on a tiny little bolt. It's got nice big broad axis and moves very smoothly and predictably. So that's what you want. If you're buying something like a tripod mount, not a homemade or a Dobsonian mount, where there's different size tripods, just make sure it's rated to hold the telescope, the size and the weight of the telescope you're putting on it. Sometimes the telescope makers, they're trying to get the telescope for the cheapest price and compete with each other. It is worth asking at the telescope shop, is this mount really suited? Could I step up to the next level of mount and get a smoother mount, and what would that be like? They're good questions to ask, and a good salesman isn't there to sell you a telescope. A good salesman there is to ask you and find out what sort of scope you want. So it is really fair trade that you're able to ask reasonable questions and get reasonable answers. And if they don't want to give you answers, then ask a different telescope shop maybe, or ring up at a different time, see if you get someone different in the same shop. They're really good to ask lots of questions. Easy to transport your telescope. This is an important one because most of us are in the suburban backyard, and the skies aren't as dark as we would like, and there's a lot of dust and pollution in the sky, and all the light from the street lights is reflecting back down from that dust in the atmosphere. So it's a little bit veiled, and the objects don't look as good as they do from a dark sky. So you're going to want to be able to take your telescope out to a dark sky a few times a year, hopefully, maybe more than that. Holiday destination, take it away if you're packing up the kids in the van, or you're just going off, the two of you. Great to take the telescope, teach the kids a bit of astronomy, and the people around you. If you're going holidaying with friends, you can show them through your telescope as well. I've got a little mention here. Despite the suburban backyard, you should still observe from home. Now, that is really important, because if you only observe when you go away, and you only get away 3 or 4 times a year, each time you go, you're struggling to find things. And what you can do from home is do a bit of research, whether you're looking at your sky and telescope, or breaking out stellarium, starry night, or a star atlas. You can't see them in great detail from home, but you should be practicing to find where they are. And then when you get up to the dark sky, you'll be able to jump to these objects much more quickly than if you only do it a few times a year. So observing from home is very worthwhile. You don't want a telescope like this that doesn't fit in the car. There's a whole story behind that. We won't go into that.
Ken, I just bought one off eBay. I just bought one off eBay. Yeah. Should I sell it?
Oh, if you've got a card like that goes with it, keep it. It's beautiful. I have heard of people deciding between a 10-inch and a 12-inch, and they went to 12, and they forgot to measure the door handle. So when they closed the door, it didn't fit, and they had to lift one end up on a box to fit it in the car. Yeah. So measure your car. And if you've only got a small space in the car because you've got the whole family going with you, one of the requirements may be you need a really compact telescope. So that's something to think about. Not too expensive. Like any hobby, pays not to pay too much. If you pay thousands of dollars when you come to sell it second hand, you could be losing hundreds, or maybe more, just because of the new sticker price. If you buy a basic beginner telescope that's meeting all these things like easy to use, easy to transport, etc., that we're talking about, it's going to be the sort of telescope that the next beginner wants, because it's exactly the same sort of basic telescope, does all the things you want, all the basic things, finds the bright deep sky objects in the sky. So it should be easier to sell as well. Once you start cluttering lots of expensive items, accessories on it, they become options. People start thinking, oh, maybe I won't buy that because it's an extra $400 and I'm not sure I want all those accessories. But a basic telescope should take you a couple of years of observing the sky before you start running out of objects to look at. It's going to show you all the different types of objects. So you're going to be able to look at galaxies and planetary nebulas, double stars, planets, all those things. It's a good selection. Hopefully it teaches you the sort of objects that you enjoy viewing most, and it'll start making you think about, okay, I really like this astronomy. I've been doing it a couple of years. It's working out. I want to upgrade my telescope. It's going to teach you about what your next telescope is going to be. You would have learnt, okay, I want to look at planets. Maybe I want a refractor, or I need more aperture because I want to see some of these galaxies. I want to see some spiral arms. It all comes down to what your preference is, and hopefully the beginner telescope will teach you that. Okay, so that's all the basics, but maybe you've got a telescope that was behaving badly, you didn't like it, it didn't work out, and you've chucked it in a cupboard or out the back in the shed. But maybe it wasn't the telescope. Maybe it was cheap eyepieces, a wobbly mount, or the finder scope was so small that you just couldn't see anything. So show it around to other people in the ASV, you know, shows them some pictures. We can't get together at the moment. Talk to people in Deep Sky or the instrument making section, and they'll probably tell you fairly quickly whether it might be worth saving. So here's one that was saved. This is from an Ice in Space forum, the Amateur Telescope Makers Forum, and he had a basic little 4-inch reflector here, and it came on a big wobbly mount with these slow motion controls, equatorial thing, and he said to himself, you know, he's a bit of an amateur telescope maker, and he thought, you know, the telescope's actually quite right. The mount's the problem. And so he changed the finder scope to a little red dot, and he put it on a little Dobsonian mount that's really portable. He can just take it anywhere, just about, sit it on a table, and observe away. And it worked out as a nice, decent take anywhere telescope. So maybe you have a telescope that could be rescued. It's something to think about. How do you choose? Well, as I said at the start, a Newtonian telescope on a Dobsonian mount, really excellent choice. It's affordable. It's a very simple 2-piece base and tube telescope. You take the base out of your car, you stick it on the ground, make sure it's reasonably flat and it doesn't wobble, and then you put the tube on the top, and then you get out your box of accessories, put your eyepiece in, do your alignment with the finder scope, and away you go. And up to about 10 inches, they should fit in most cars. A small refractor is a different option, offers a much wider field of view, and that is something that the Newtonian telescope can't match. You know, you can get a good 2 or 3 degree field of view in a little refractor. Of course, if you don't have a lot of money, you go for an achromat. They suffer a bit of color fringing, but only on the really bright stars, the brightest objects. The apochromat, which is much more expensive, fixes the problem, but then it's a high price. So it's probably not a beginner telescope anymore. And the size of the scope, it goes up exponentially. So try to stick within your budget. Of course, some people liken this to buying a car. Some people will spend the bare minimum on a car. Some people will go out and spend $70,000, $80,000, $100,000 on a car. People do that sort of thing with telescopes, so be aware of your budget. Then there's the compound telescope. So if people need something really, really tiny, really, really small, that's very portable, they sometimes go with a little Mac or a Smith-Cassegrain in a really small size, like a 5 or a 6-inch telescope that packs up nice and small. You can't say a 10-inch Smith-Cassegrain is a beginner telescope, because it really isn't. It's thousands of dollars. It's a lot of gear to set up and a lot of cables and everything else. And Newtonian Mexudos, they're not compact. They're about the same size as the Newtonian, but they do have that bit wider view. So there's a few different types in there. So when you're thinking about, you know, I'm thinking a Newtonian, but I'm not going to be able to fit it into my car, or I actually do want something with tracking on it, so I'm thinking about a computer. But we're not going to talk about the computer side, because we could rattle on for as long as I've talked already. That's up to you. Now, once you've decided on your telescope, we'll take a quick look at the options over the other, because sometimes when you've narrowed it down to the type of telescope, the brand you end up buying can be the difference of the focuser. For instance, someone wants a certain focuser, so the 2-inch or the 1 1/4 inch could be one of the differences. 2-inch is great for the low power views, because you can get these big wide barrel eyepieces that let a little bit more light in, and the designers can squeeze more lenses, and you can get that big wide field view, a bit wider view than what you can with a 1.25". So it gives you a few more options. Eyepiece tip: if you've spent good money on quality eyepieces, when you sell your beginner scope, keep the good eyepieces because they'll really go well on your next scope. Don't give them away. Dual speed focuser. Now this is something that, you know, wasn't around 20-30 years ago. None of the telescopes had, not amateur scopes, they didn't have the 10:1 slow-mo focuser, fine focus. It's because telescopes are getting shorter, and as you get shorter and shorter telescopes, the amount of focus travel gets shorter and shorter, so you've got to be much more accurate. So the old telescopes that were f8 never needed fine 10:1 focus because they have so much focus travel, you could dial it in as it was. So as your telescopes get shorter, this is where the 10:1 comes in. So if you're getting a 6-inch f8 telescope, you don't need the 10:1 focus. But if you're doing things like planets or splitting multiple stars, or if you're doing a bit of astrophotography, Paul will talk about this, the 10:1 focus becomes really important. The size of your finder scope. If it's too small, you're just not going to be able to find the object, the faint fuzzy objects, because what the finder scope does, it not just gives you a magnified view, it shows you fainted things. So those little faint fuzzy objects will pop into view. If it's too small, it's not going to happen. So if it's smaller than 30 mil, it's just not big enough. And if it's too large, it's going to cost a few $100s, which might be, you know, a third of the cost of your telescope. And it is really easy on a small telescope to upset the balance by putting some great big whopping, it's really a second telescope on your telescope. So the standard 50 mil telescope is a really good option. This is where the arguments break out. The purists, they only like the straight through. Well, why? The question is why. Well, the trick of looking through a finder scope and the telrad as well is you can look with both eyes open, which means one eye is looking through the lens and getting a magnified view, and the other eye can see a good, the whole constellation that you're viewing in. So with one eye, you can work out the constellation and where you should be trying to move the telescope through, and the magnified view is going to show up the faint fuzzy object, and it's going to give you a bit of magnification so you can get more accurately and see those fainter stars that you've worked out your star hop. So you start from the very brightest star, you go to fainter star, bouncing down to the object, and that's what the finder scope does it. So I reckon the people who hate right angle finders hate it because it cuts off their sky view. That's my theory, and I'm sure there's a lot of stories and people will argue left and right about that one. That's my opinion, but I use both. I can use both. It doesn't worry me too much. I use my telrad mostly. Most people go for the right angle view to look after their back, especially with the small scope. If it's only a metre long, you've got to get your head down quite low and then turn it sideways and be looking up in the sky. And you could be looking up high, you can be looking down low, and it's anything but comfortable. Some people stick a little stool under to lift a small 6-inch telescope up a bit high to make that a bit easier. But most people will go for a right angle finder because it's better on the back. It's much more comfortable. One of the other things is to either purchase or make your own observing chair where you can move that seat up and down. You can see the notches up and down the front here. You can move this seat up and down. So if you're looking down low in the sky, you can put the seat down right low, and if you're up high, you can sit up perched high. So you can sit at your telescope and observe most things rather than bending over and standing all night. So in summary, I hope this presentation is giving you some questions to pose about the telescopes when you're having a look. You're always welcome to drop into the new Astronomers Group. Just log on as a member, go to the Zoom page, and all the details will be there for the Zoom meetings. In February, we talk about telescopes. So, I've pulled this talk tonight out of the meeting notes from February. So there's a whole lot of other stuff we talk about, filters, eyepieces, all sorts of stuff. The basics of how the eye works and how telescopes work. So I'll go to questions, and then I've got a quick view of the NAG.
We've got a couple of questions in the chat if
yep.
you'd like to see them, Ken. Do you have some there, or do you want me to pop these ones up?
Is that I can see them now. Is that a small or extra large family size? It's probably a small pizza box, I would say. That one?
Oh no, that's just Perry being silly. I've got some questions here for you. So we've got a couple off YouTube. So Mitten Punked, which is, I love the name because anything with punked in it, I'm happy with. Recently got a 10-inch Dob and I'm keen to upgrade my eyepieces. Should I upgrade my current ones or get different magnifications I don't have yet? So you talked a little bit about that before. It is a really good
question, and I guess it depends on what eyepieces you've got. A 10-inch Dob, I'm not going to say go out and buy TeleView eyepieces because each one of those is probably the same price as your telescope. But a simple Plossl eyepiece is a really good eyepiece for a beginner. So I'd lean more towards getting different magnifications. The best eyepiece to have is the low magnification. Make sure you've got a good low magnification because there's a lot of big objects in the sky that you need that. You tend to use your high magnification on planets, but not a lot else. So yeah, I'd go for different eyepieces.
That leads into the next question from Mitten Punked as well. Taking into consideration atmospheric conditions, what will be the smallest millimetre eyepiece a 10-inch Dob could take? So therefore, you're talking,
I've got a 12-inch Dob, and the smallest or highest magnification, I've got a 6mm eyepiece, and there's a lot of time that you put the 6mm in and it looks terrible because you don't get the good atmospheric conditions all the time. But yeah, beyond 6mm, I wouldn't go too much further. Maybe a 4mm, because you're really pushing.
Can I just jump in for a second?
Yeah, sure.
Magnifications over 200 power really requires some very good steady seeing. So if you calculate your eyepieces up to around about 180 to 200 magnification, that may be your medium to high end, but do keep the capability of being able to go to 300 or so magnification for those very, very nights where the seeing is nice and steady.
I have looked through, I think I looked through a little astrophysics refractor that was only 4 inches at Saturn, and it was just amazing. And I thought, it's the scope. I was believing all the glossy brochures. But then 6 months later, I had a really crisp, clear night looking through my 12-inch and saw the same view, if not better. It's the night, it's the clarity.
Okay, so Mitten Punk's got another one. Here we go. Telrads, are they worth it? I say yes.
I say yes.
Yeah, three thumbs up. Perry's hiding in the
Absolutely.
background, and even he put a thumbs up as well. They are amazing things. They make life so much simpler for a push around dob, that's for sure. Or even a tracking telescope as well. But yeah, they're great. I don't think we've got any other questions in here. We've got some for Paul, but he hasn't done his talk yet.
Yeah, okay. Look, perhaps, Mark, if you would like to introduce Paul. And,
so, Ken, I'm going to hide you in the background, and we'll bring Paul out. Paul, good evening. He's on mute. Make sure he unmutes. You're on mute, Paul. You're on mute. He's not listening at all. Paul, you're on mute. You have to unmute yourself. Hang on.
Oh, I thought you could do that, Mark.
No, well, I tried, but it wouldn't let me.
Sorry.
Start again.
Thanks, Mark, and thanks, Ken, for that amazing presentation. Very informative on beginners telescopes. And sorry, I had it muted just in case there was any noise in the background here. I didn't want to interfere. Okay, I'm section director for astrophotography, and I'm going to do a little bit of a presentation about what we do in the section, what we can provide for you in the way of astrophotography and learning to get started. And then we'll talk a little bit about some of the easiest ways to get started with basically a camera and a tripod. And we'll also show you some nice images along the way. So if Mark wants to switch over to my shared screen. Thanks, Mark. The astrophotography section has quite a lot of facilities available to members. First of all, we have our Melbourne club rooms in Burwood, often referred to as the Lodge. And we have monthly meetings there, usually when there's a full moon, because the skies are fairly bright at night and it's difficult to take astrophotography when there's a full moon. So we tend to have our monthly meetings around that time. Sometimes we'll run some short courses there. Haven't done that for a year, and COVID, of course, is the reason for that. And the same with some of the meetings, of course, are now all on Zoom. But hopefully we'll be able to start that up again next year, perhaps. We also have a dark sky site in central Victoria, and we tend to hold informal meetings there once a month when there is a new moon, because the sky is so dark. And we often hold field trips there, which we call boot camps, to train people, newcomers, on how to do some astrophotography. And we show them how to use their equipment and give them a helping hand. There's an astrophotography field there and a complete observatory, but a little bit more about that in a moment. But we also have social media groups, and obviously the Facebook group, which is a closed members only group, and Groups.io, and there's a number of online galleries where we can share information or images, some of them at high resolution, such as on Flickr or AstroBin. A little bit more detail about the dark sky site, which is just a fantastic resource for astrophotography, also for visual observing, but I'm going to concentrate on what we've got there for astrophotography. We have a dedicated field with power and piers to put mounts on, some spare adapters and equipment for EQ6 mounts, which are a very popular mount. So you'll often see the field full of up to 20, at least. Probably we can fit 20 on, 10 on either side of the field. There's plenty of power outlets to run all the equipment, so you don't need to be battery operated. We also have a complete astrophotography observatory. This is a 3-meter dome, which houses an Ioptron mount and a 10-inch f5 Newtonian telescope with a CCD cooled camera. and we do training sessions on how to use that equipment. And all you need to do is bring along a USB stick. You don't have to have any other equipment, just something to store your images on. So the great advantage of being a member of the ASV is you can actually do astrophotography without any equipment at all. So let's have a look at some of the things, some of the images that you could actually capture using the equipment and facilities provided by the ASV. You could take deep sky galaxies like this one, using the equipment in the dome, or wide field nebula, deep sky nebula like this, with the same telescope. You could take pictures of the moon, and you can do this with your own telescopes as well. It's always a really good way to get started taking pictures of the moon, although this one was taken with a Canon 60D on a 12-inch f5 Newtonian. I know that Mark, our anchorman, is currently taking images that are not much different to this with an iPhone connected to a Dobsonian. So it's always a good way to start. You could take some amazing images of the planets, as seen here by taken by Mark Justice and Bratislav, members of the ASV. Of course, you do need a specialized camera to do this and a lot of processing techniques, but it is possible with the equipment that the ASV has. You could also image the sun. We have a solar section that has a dedicated telescope for solar imaging, and you could capture images like this. If you already own a telescope and a camera, you could buy an adapter to attach the camera to the telescope, and that might be that you have a DSLR and a Dobsonian or a reflector or a refracting telescope, or you might just have an iPhone. So there's a range of adapters that allow you to connect your camera to a telescope. So if you already have a camera and a telescope, I advise you buy an adapter and try and see what you can do. And I assure you, you'll be able to capture images of the moon, at least, like the one you saw previously. But by far the easiest way to get started in astrophotography, if you don't have any equipment, is just to use a camera and a tripod. So we're going to look at the sort of images that you can capture with a camera and a tripod, and the equipment that you need to do that. If you have a camera and a tripod, you can actually take quite a lot of different subjects. You can take nightscape images of the Milky Way or aurora, or the moon and planetary alignments, or perhaps large comets. Nightscape images are just like landscape images during the day, only taken at night. So you need a wide angle lens and of course a camera on a tripod so that it doesn't move during the image. You could take star trails like the one in the background there and record the apparent motion of the stars. You could take panoramas by combining lots of images to get a wider view, perhaps even a 360 degree view of the horizon, and the Milky Way stretching from one side of the sky to the other. You can also take time-lapse images, which is combining many short exposures to create a video sequence. So there's a lot of things you can do with just a camera and a good lens on a tripod. So let's take a little bit of a look at the equipment that's required. As I said, you need a DSLR camera is recommended, and one that you can change the lenses on. But if you have a fixed camera, compact camera that doesn't have interchangeable lenses, then give that a go as well. You need a sturdy tripod so that the camera doesn't shake, because although you won't be taking really, really long exposures, you will be taking exposures of at least 30 seconds. And that's a lot slower than daylight photography. So you'll definitely need a tripod. You also need a shutter release or an external intervalometer, or perhaps a Wi-Fi controlled camera if you've got a modern camera. Some way of actually taking the image without touching the camera. Because again, if you touch the camera while it's on the tripod, you will move it or shake it and the image will be blurry. While kit lenses and standard zoom lenses are quite adequate for taking most nightscape images, a manual focus or fixed focus lens is always better. Zoom lenses are a real compromise. So if you're going to buy another lens to take photography with your camera for nightscapes, I'd recommend buying a manual focus lens. They're also cheaper than an automatic focus lens, and the automatic focus basically won't work at night anyway. You'll have to turn it off and manually focus. You want a fast lens, and by that we mean something that has a low f-stop. So the lens opens a wide amount to allow lots of light in. So f2 to f2.8, and a short focal length like 14 to 20 millimeters is ideal. Basic camera settings, you have to operate in manual mode. Nothing automatic tends to work in the dark. You have to manually focus, as I mentioned before. You should probably set the white balance to sunny, even though it's nighttime. And that's because if you want to get a realistic color to the night sky, it should actually be set to sunny. If you do it automatic, that'll probably work okay, but certainly it might provide a bit of a color cast. There's a few other options in the camera which you should probably consider turning on or turning off, depending on what you're trying to do. There's something called long exposure noise reduction. This removes some of the noise that's actually generated inside the camera during a 30-second or longer exposure. And that can be turned on if you're taking single shots. But if you're taking time-lapse images, that should be turned off. Otherwise, you will get gaps between each image. You need to set the camera to continuous mode for time-lapse so that it just keeps shooting once you push the button or push the trigger on your intervalometer. Exposures for nightscape single-shot images or time-lapse images are going to be between 15 and 30 seconds, depending where you're pointing in the sky, and you want a reasonably high ISO of around 3200 so that you capture a fair amount of light. Again, you need the largest aperture or the smallest f-stop, so if it's your standard kit lens, that'll be 3.5. Exposure for single shot star trails. If you're doing star trails, you can take up to a single 1 hour exposure, but it will generate a lot of noise in the camera. And you'll also need a very low ISO to minimize that. Otherwise, the sky will be totally overexposed. And in this case, you need a high aperture. Again, the stars will be totally overexposed. It's also possible to do star trails by taking lots of short nightscape exposures of 15 to 30 seconds and then combining them to produce a star trail. Focusing at night is very difficult, so that takes a lot of practice. You preferably can use a camera with live view if your camera does that. And if it's got a screen that flips up a little bit so that it's easier to see the screen, that's a big advantage, because often you'll have the camera pointing up at the night sky and the screen pointing down at the ground, and it's really hard to get down on the ground and look into the back of the camera. The only way to focus is really to point at a bright star and roughly focus manually, and then if you've got live view operating, you can switch that to 10 times and very carefully adjust the focus to get the smallest possible star on the screen. Other methods, you could focus on something in the horizon during the daytime and then tape the lens up. So effectively, you've set it to infinity and it's not going to move, hopefully, if you've taped it up all right. If the stars are not bright enough to see in live view, you could take a series of test shots and then compare the images, and each time you take a test shot, move the focuser a few small steps at a time. So it takes a lot of practice to focus it in the dark, and you certainly can't just set your camera to the infinity mark on the lens, because all modern autofocus cameras, infinity is not at the end of the lens. It's usually somewhere closer to that little L-shaped mark you see on the image on the screen. You should also shoot in RAW mode. A lot of people are used to shooting in JPEG mode and get a quick image that they can upload online, but that loses a lot of information when you're capturing images, so you really have to shoot in RAW mode. It captures the maximum amount of data. It has the minimum amount of camera processing internally, which means you can process the image the way you want it after you capture it with some image processing software like Photoshop or Lightroom. There's no in-camera data loss. You have maximum control over the final image. And RAW is a non-destructive format, so that if you do actually edit the images in RAW, you can always go back and look at the original data. You're not going to lose any information. The other thing you need to do is find a nice dark location. Here's a map of Victoria showing the light pollution. And you can see I've marked ASV in the middle there in central Victoria, and that's about where our dark sky site is. Now on this map, you can see that the very bright areas, like in Melbourne, are pink or bright red or even white. And then yellow as it gets a little bit darker, and green, and then light blue, and eventually that fairly dark grey blue, which is almost pristine skies, extremely dark. But the areas of Victoria that you can sort of see the simulated green patches of land underneath are almost pristine dark sky sites that are the best ones for astrophotography. So the ASV site in central Victoria is not too bad in the scheme of things. So that's why we'll go up there once a month to try and capture images. So what can you capture with a camera and a tripod? Here's a few images by some of our members. Neil Creek won a David Malin Award for that image on the left. And Alex Cherney has taken a beautiful image of Aurora down at Flinders on the right there. Here's another image of a comet that was taken over Williamstown Beach by the looks of it, or perhaps from St Kilda. And on the right-hand side is some star trails taken up at the LMDSS with our astrophotography dome in the foreground. So they're the sort of images you can take with a camera, but what if you could actually follow the stars? And still, just using a camera and a camera lens, if you could track the motion of the stars, you'd be amazed what you can do next. So there's a whole range of small telescope mounts called camera tracking mounts that allow you to mount your DSLR and will follow the stars across the sky while you're taking your image. You can now take longer images than 15 to 30 seconds, and you'll be able to capture a lot more information. You can also start to use longer focal length lenses, up to perhaps 300 millimeters. And you can extend the exposures, as I said, up to about 2 minutes. They're simple to use, they're lightweight and portable, and you can take them camping with you or into a dark sky site. They just require a solid tripod. They don't need a special camera, a special telescope mount to put them on, because the small motor-driven head is the part that's actually tracking the stars, and you simply need to put that onto a tripod. You can now take wide field images of nebula, galaxies, close-up images of comets, and the number of targets that you can now capture is greatly enhanced. One thing that these require, like all telescopes designed for astrophotography, they need to be polar aligned. So what does that mean? As the Earth turns around, it appears that the stars in the sky all rotate around a point in the sky called the South Celestial Pole, or if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, the North Celestial Pole. And there's a star trail image taken at the LMDSS of all the stars rotating around the South Celestial Pole. So to polar align one of these little mounts, they have a little telescope in there called a polarscope, which allows you to see a constellation close to the South Celestial Pole. And you can then align this telescope with that constellation, and the motor in the mount will then follow the rotation of the stars. So the camera mounted on it will then, in theory, follow the stars across the sky. And it all depends on how accurately you polar align, or how accurately that axis of the mount points at the South Celestial Pole. Once you've achieved that, you're able to take pictures like this. This one was taken by Nicholas Jones with an Ioptron Sky Tracker and a Sony S7 DSLR camera. It's actually 14 60-second exposures that have been stacked together, then processed, and the end result is a beautiful image like that. Now, this is impossible to do without the camera following the stars, so you can't do this on a single tripod. If you were to take, this is probably with a, I'm not sure what focal length lens, but that might be about 100 millimeter lens. If you did have a 100 millimeter lens on a tripod, you would be restricted to about a 2-second exposure before the stars start to trail and make star trails. But here he's taken 1-minute exposures at that focal length and combined them. Here's another one by Phil Hart, taken with a Skywatcher Star Adventurer and a special cooled DSLR camera, but it's still a DSLR camera on a tracking mount. This shows the Lagoon Nebula and the Trifid, I think. Here's another one taken on a Star Adventurer by Mark Sampson, and you can see that this is a 200 millimeter lens, which is a fast prime focal length lens. You notice it's f2.8. As I was saying, if you're going to buy lenses, you want to buy a manual, fast, good quality telephoto lens or wide angle lens. This was 15 times 1-minute exposures. Again, at 200 millimeters on a tripod, you would not be able to take an exposure longer than half a second before the stars begin to trail. And in half a second, you just won't collect any of that data that you see in the background. You can see that the Tarantula Nebula there, the green one down sort of at about 7 o'clock. That's a huge nebula. You'd be lucky to see any of this at half a second. But at 60 seconds, with today's sensitive cameras, you can actually capture amazing images. So as you can see, you can take a picture of a galaxy like this. This is the Large Magellan Cloud, which is a small galaxy that rotates around our galaxy. So here's a picture of a distant galaxy taken with a standard camera and a 200 millimeter photo lens that you probably couldn't get a decent image of a mark at the grand final with, because they use something like 1,000 millimeter lenses. So just put that into perspective, what you can actually take with standard cameras and lenses. Of course, capturing images is only the start. Once you've captured your images, you have to process them. And at the ASV, we can help you to learn how to process those images and produce the results that you've just seen on the screen. So I'm not going to talk about what telescope you could need. I can, people can ask questions, but that's my introduction to getting started with astrophotography. If people want to ask about possible telescope solutions, I'll answer that directly. So you can switch back to me, Mark, or I'll stop sharing the screen. There we go. Okay. Not sure if there's any questions because I'm not hearing any sound at the moment.
There are quite a few questions, actually.
Yeah.
So James has popped a few questions up. Sorry, I was putting the little one to bed quickly. Did a dash run. So we've got James's. What's the most effective, efficient, accurate method for polar aligning?
Lots of practice. If you're using a polar scope, I've seen people online say, you know, at last, after 6 months, I'm going to get polar aligned tonight. Well, it shouldn't take you that long. You'd be losing a lot of dark sky sights, dark sky time if it took 6 months. But with a polar scope and some practice, you should be able to get it done within 15 minutes or so. But it takes a lot of practice because it's difficult to see the objects through the polar scope. There are other digital methods using cameras. For example, there's the PoleMaster from QHY CCD, and there's the iPolar from iOptron. These things cost about $500. So you're adding quite an expense to your small tracking mount, which also costs about $500 to $1,000. But that's a good way to polar align them. You can also attach an additional camera to the polar scope and therefore get a much better view than you can with your own eyes. But again, you'd need something like a very sensitive guide camera. And again, that's going to cost you $200 to $300 at least to get a small camera that will amplify the image from the polar scope. But that is another option to making it easier to polar align.
Can I second iPolar because Blake loves it? He's
I second PoleMaster because I love it, but that's only
he's done in 5 minutes. 5 minutes. He's polar aligned with iPolar. He loves it.
Yes.
Okay. So James again. Would you recommend purchasing a dedicated astronomy camera or a proper camera for astrophotography?
Again, it depends how keen you are. See, this gets back to the argument about, do I go out and buy a Schmidt-Cassegrain telescope for $3,000 or a Dobsonian? And then, I found it difficult to use and I need to sell it. You need to know that astrophotography is really what you want to do, just like you need to know that observing is what you really want to do, as Ken explained in his introduction to telescopes. If you have a DSLR camera, I would say use it first. Learn how to capture some images, learn how to process those images, and then if you want to take the next step, yes, get a CCD, a cooled CCD camera. In the past, people used to actually modify DSLR cameras by taking out filters and getting them cooled, and it would cost lots and lots of money to do that unless you did it yourself, but most people are not that handy. So, and also it destroyed the warranty on the camera. So these days, CCD cameras have come down to almost the same cost as a good quality professional DSLR. So if you don't have a camera and you know for sure you're going to do astrophotography, you can consider a CCD cooled camera. But I would still go with a DSLR because you'll learn everything with it and you'll always have that. And you'll always be able to take star trials while you're using your next camera that you purchase for dedicated astrophotography.
Okay, one from David that I can kind of answer. Are there any advantages using a digital SLR over a smartphone with how advanced smartphone cameras have become? I would assume not. Probably is, but personally for myself, I love my smartphone. And Paul, you'll be happy to know, I upgraded. So
you upgraded? Okay.
Upgraded. I can now take timed exposures. So
yes. Look,
it's a fine line, isn't it?
Is going ahead in leaps and bounds. In fact, this year's category, there was a category at the David Malin Awards, which is a main astrophotography contest here in Australia. And one category was for smartphone astrophotography. So it's quite amazing what you can capture with a smartphone now. It's getting close to, but not quite there yet. A good DSLR camera and the ability to change the lenses and to attach it to a telescope, it's a completely different thing than what you can currently do with a smartphone. However, the technology is advancing very fast. Some of that processing that I was talking about, stacking images together and enhancing them, is now actually happening inside the smartphones as they take the images. So stay tuned and just buy the latest model next time if that's really what you want to get. It's on the horizon.
I like a good challenge. What have we got? We've got one from Zaphis. CCD, is it better than CMOS?
CCD are basically no longer made. So there is no companies manufacturing CCD chips. And you'll find that all the cameras, or the astro manufacturers of astronomy cameras are now producing CMOS, only because there are no CCDs available. So it'll be secondhand if you're buying CCD, certainly within the next year or two.
And one last one, James again. I bought an astronomy compass in hopes this will assist in polar aligning. The south celestial pole is blocked by a bloody big gum tree. I think quite a few people have had those issues. So I can't align the stars. Is it possible to use this?
You can roughly polar align with a compass and spirit levels and things. You need to get the mount axis pointing perfectly in the north-south direction. That is not magnetic north, but true north-south. And it has to be accurate within, well, depending on the focal length and the length of the time of the exposure, you'd want to be much less than half a degree. So it should be spot on, but anything less is okay. It's hard to do manually like that. It's possible, but not for very long exposures. If you can't see it, you could, well, I won't say cut the tree down because the greenies might get upset with me, or you could try a different location, or perhaps coming up to the dark sky site.
I was just about to say, James, if you're not an ASV member yet, I'd recommend becoming one.
Yes, that's right. Just one thing on that. You mentioned the iPolar before. It will actually align because it uses something called plate solving, even if it can't see the celestial pole. So it is possible, as long as you can see something within a degree or two of the celestial pole, you might actually be able to use the iPolar. But going to the dark sky site's the best option.
Yeah. So joining ASV, become a member, come to Deep Sky. I know you want to keep going. Steve, there's one last question, which Paul will be able to answer quickly, which is an important one, I think. This one, what filters are used on the lenses to give those pictures? So just to clarify that some of those images had filters, some of them didn't.
Most of those images would have had no filters.
There you go.
The one that was by Phil Hart that had the Lagoon Nebula and the Trifid Nebula, that camera is modified, so it has a filter removed. So that's why you could see a lot of red hydrogen alpha information in those nebulas. But most of the other cameras, standard DSLRs.
There you go. Answers.
Take any filters off because the filters cause reflections. So if you've got most people will have a UV filter or a sky filter during the day, to stop them putting fingerprints on the lens. Take that off when you're doing your deep sky stuff. Don't touch the lens, of course, and then put that back on for daytime and protection.
There we go. All yours, Steve.
Okay. Look, thanks, guys. I much appreciate your time and effort. This is the third in our series highlighting our sections. We try to keep our newer members in mind with our talks. So if you're a new member and you're enjoying these talks, please drop me an email at president@asv.org.au. You don't have to remember that. It's on the website. So if you go onto the website, you can find my email that way. So please drop me a line if you think this is a benefit. If I don't hear any emails, then maybe we will stop doing section meetings.
All right. Section directors are going to block your email now.
I know. All right. Thanks for the talks. That brings us now to Sky for the month with Perry. We're at 9:20, Perry, so 15 minutes, if you wouldn't mind. Mark's got his stopwatch running.
That's 15 minutes. That's half an hour in Perry time, isn't it?
Yeah, well.
He's muted, so we can't even hear him. I guess that means we have no Sky for the night. He's back.
Dan. Yes, just yank me off the stage like you normally do with a crook, Steve. That'll do. Just before we get into it, good evening, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to the ASV monthly meeting once again. And I'd like to begin by talking about a couple of things that I'm not going to show using Starry Night or any program, because in fact you can't physically see what I'm going to be talking about on planetarium programs or software. And these are two meteor showers that you may have heard about. One of them is the Leonids, which occur during November every year, around about the 18th to about the 22nd. This year, they're supposed to peak on the morning of the 22nd. And the other is the Taurids, the Northern Taurid meteor shower. And they peak, in fact, tomorrow morning, supposedly. However, both of these two showers are nowhere near as active as you may think they are. The Leonids had their peak back in 2001, and it was a magnificent show for anybody that was fortunate enough to be able to see them. Since then, every time I've gotten up to see the Leonids, I have seen almost always nothing. So I don't recommend that you spend or waste a lot of time on the Leonids, but if you want to get a meteor fix and you're really dying to see a shooting star, which is the colloquial name for meteors, the best time is probably between about 3:30 and dawn tomorrow morning for the Taurids, or certainly after midnight at least. And for the Leonids, 3:30, 4 a.m. till about 5:30 or thereabouts. But don't expect to see many, if any at all. However, there is a saving grace with the Taurids. Now, they do have some very bright fireballs, and twice I've been fortunate enough to actually be looking in the right direction to see one over the last few years. One was with Russell Cockman, our solar section director. We were down the bay here, not far from my place, looking for an aurora. And all of a sudden, from the northern sky and shooting all the way to the south was this magnificent, bright, torrid meteor. We didn't see any others in all the time that we were out there, but this one bright one made it worthwhile. And we were probably there for a couple of hours at least. The other one was at the Vic South Star Party in Neil, and I believe a couple of people may have captured it on film. I think Mark Sansom actually managed to get something on film, and I'm a little bit distracted, ladies and gentlemen, because my cat has just knocked over a chair onto the bench. Jove, you should be out. Anyway, I'll catch up with him later and fix up the mess. My cleaning lady is coming in tomorrow morning. She'll be happy to find that. The other thing I want to talk about, and again, no matter what you read on the internet about these things, the meteor showers, and also there's a partial penumbral lunar eclipse on the 30th, straight after moonrise. In fact, it occurs whilst the moon is below the horizon, and we will see the last part of it. But a penumbral eclipse is very difficult to notice, especially during twilight, because the moon goes through the Earth's weakest shadow, and it's not very easy to discern. In fact, not all of the moon is going to go through that shadow, perhaps 2/3 of the moon. And again, it's not going to be easily visible, but give it a go. You may be able to witness a little bit of darker shading on the moon, and that would be as a result of the eclipse. So that would be on Monday, the 30th of November, straight after sunset, as soon as the moon rises in the eastern horizon. So now let's get Sky for the Night up. Can we share the screen, Mark? Is it being shared?
Yes, it is. It's on full screen now.
Okay.
And can we get a show just for Jove, like a private show just for Jove, for everyone to just watch what he does on? We get everyone's like classic Perry, classic Jove. Everyone, he's more famous than the rest of us.
Well, he's settled down now. I see, just leaving his fur on the couch. So let's go to the western sky this evening, and let's enlarge slightly. There we go. Let's go to the west. Mark, is it possible to get rid of that little window at the bottom that says StreamYard is sharing a window?
It's not on our screen. It's only on your screen.
Good, terrific.
Yep.
Okay, so if we roll time back a little bit to about sunset. And we can see the sun at this time of year is setting quite some distance from where west is towards the southwest. I might just check time. So sunset these days is a little bit after 8 o'clock. Today it occurred at 5 minutes past 8. And it'll gradually get later until we get to around the 21st, 22nd of December, when we reach the summer solstice. So advancing time now, the things that become prominent way up high, Jupiter and Saturn. There's a bit of a chance of seeing the head of the Scorpion through Antares here, the bright first magnitude star, which marks the heart of the Scorpion, and then the tail winding around. Sagittarius here, which looks a bit like an upside down teapot. That's the lid of the teapot right there. The handle is over here. That's the base of the teapot. The pouring spout is here. The best way to see it is if you can lie on your back with your head facing, or the top of your head nearest west, and you'll be able to see the teapot shape a little bit easier. And once you've noticed what it looks like, you can do it normally, just standing up in the traditional manner with both feet on the ground and head up towards the sky. If we zoom in on Jupiter, we'll have a look at what it's doing tonight. So let's go
it's tipping
there.
tables over, Perry.
I'm sorry?
It's tipping tables over, isn't it?
I'm not sure what you're getting at there, Mark.
Well, Jove tipped a table over, did he not?
No, a chair.
A chair. Well,
Chair
Jupiter's
on
tipping
the-
chairs over. There we go.
Yes. Okay, so a little bit earlier tonight, we had a shadow of a moon right here in Jupiter. There's the cloud bands that are most prominent. You can see these in a small telescope. An 8-inch Dobsonian gives you a magnificent view of them. And here's Io. This might be Europa and Callisto. Ganymede is probably further away down here. And if we advance the time, we can actually see the moons moving, and also Jupiter, and the little shadow that's on Jupiter from probably Europa being cast there, and an eclipse is occurring on the surface, well, Jupiter doesn't have any surface, but on the cloud tops of Jupiter. There we go. There's the eclipse that's occurring right there. So by moving the time forward, you can see it rotating. If we zoom out, a little bit further, oops, not zoomed out enough as yet. Still not zoomed out enough. Here we go. We'll now zoom in on Saturn and have a look at what's happening there. You'll notice some moons. Right here, there's Enceladus. That's a field star. Don't be tricked into thinking it's a moon. Dione, Tethys, Rhea. This might be Titan. And the others are field stars, I'm sure. Now, what I will do is I will advance the days and watch what happens as we keep going through. The positions of the moons change from night to night. And getting to around Oops. Let's go back. Zoom out a little bit more. Let's check the dates. December the 4th. Okay, we'll zoom in a slight bit more. But as we go to the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th, you're about to get a surprise. 16, 17, 18, 19th. That's not the surprise. Let's zoom out again. And right next to it is now Jupiter. And that will be occurring on the 19th of December, straight after sunset. So you can't afford to wait too long after sunset. And the two of them will be separated by, let's see, do it the other way. No. Separated by 16 arc minutes, which is 1/4 of a degree. That's very, very close. So not high above the horizon. They'll be low in the horizon, so you'll have to get out and start searching for them straight after sunset when they're up a little bit higher. At this point, they're 10 degrees above the horizon in the west.
So Perry, what time is that you've got it just there for everyone?
This would be, well, straight after.
Looks like it's about 8:30 p.m.
Yeah, 8:30.
9:30.
Yeah, look, the earlier you can start observing it, the higher it'll be. So sunset on that evening will be at 8:40. So if we advance time, there they are, up quite high, and at that stage they're almost at say 9 o'clock, they're 20 degrees above the horizon almost. And you should be able to see them both with naked eye. Binoculars will make it easy, and this would be a good follow-up to what Paul was talking about earlier about getting some nice tripod photography or some zoom lens photography of a couple of this apparition or this conjunction of the two won't be seen again like this for many, many, many years. So it'll be a once in a lifetime occurrence. But let's go back to now, and I'll talk more about that in our December meeting, which will be before.
Going to give you a 5-minute warning, Perry.
Okay, I'll make this quick then. Let's go to sunset again, but this time we'll go to the northern sky. And let's do this. Higher, advance the time. Now, in early November, we have the Melbourne Cup, and it's strange that at the time of the Melbourne Cup, during the first couple of weeks of November or first week of November, it coincides with Pegasus, the flying horse, being in the best possible position for us to be able to observe it. Now, if I go to this screen and I bring up the constellation illustrations. You can see that right here is Pegasus, but it doesn't give us much of a view of what the constellation actually looks like to the naked eye. So let's do away with the traditional view of constellations that used to be on old atlases and go for the astronomical presentation, which is like that, so that we can get this being the body of the horse, the neck going up here and down to the nose, which is NF. Here are the front legs, and there's the back legs, but the back legs are really part of the constellation Andromeda. So let's get the illustrations out, and I'm going to point out a very interesting and important star here, and it's right there, 51 Pegasi. Now it's about 50 light years from us, and it was the first solar planet, solar-like planet, I should say, to be found to have, my apologies, solar-like star to have a planet in orbit around it right here. So there are the stars that make up the great square of Pegasus, and it's probably best to look for it shortly after dark. And here again is the neck, the eye, and the nose. And 50 Pegasi on a straight line here is just to the west of that line between Markab and Shate. Now let's go to the, just before we do that, I want to point out a double star, because I'll be writing about this particular double star in my next double diary column in
Crux Extra.
Crux Extra, which comes out, what day does it come out, Mark?
For the members, the most recent edition 32 came out today, and for the general public, I just posted volume 23 for them to download. Okay.
This is a beautiful double star, Mesothym or Gamma Arietis, which means it's the third brightest star in the constellation of Aries. And these two stars are even magnitude, and they're aligned perfectly north-south. So well worth looking for them. And they look a little bit like, I think it was Kawasaki motorcycles used to have twin headlights, and I've seen them on a country road coming towards me in the evenings. And that's what they look like in a telescope. Down here below the great square of Pegasus, we have the Andromeda Galaxy, and I'll center that for a quick look.
Make this your last object, please, Perry.
There we go. So the Andromeda is not easy from the city. You need to get out to the country, and then you'll be able to see it, not like it was depicted there, but as a faint smudge with binoculars, and possibly as an even fainter smudge with naked eye. And as we leave for tonight, we've got this magnificent eastern sky, and I love this time of year because we've got the Pleiades, the Hyades with Aldebaran, Taurus is there, Orion is here with the Saucepan, Rigel, and Betelgeuse, and over here Sirius is rising with Canis Major, the big dog, and a little bit further over Canopus. And in the southern sky, way up high, we've got Achernar right there, and a terrific double star there as well. This will be the last one, Steve. P. Eridani. If you want to look it up, it's not the Greek letter P, but rather lowercase English letter P. And this is the cat's eye double because it looks like Jove's eyes when I pull into the driveway and he's looking straight into my headlights. Thank you for your attention, and clear skies to you all.
Good, thanks, Perry. Ken, you would like to have a word? You're muted.
Okay. Just very quickly, I'd like to show the new Astronomer Group website. I lost all this when Windows 10 killed everything. So we're building it up again. It's just in the bare bones stage. This is the front landing page. If you want to know a bit about what New Astronomer Group does, I've set up a teaser page for people thinking about joining. And if you click on any of these, they're little articles, sample articles, which is why I call them teasers. Here's one I've got, Pegasus, and that talks about just what Perry's been doing. There's a crossword in here and a couple of articles, such as trying to look at the night sky like a jigsaw puzzle. These have been in the Crux magazine, so I've put a couple in here. So these are just samples, and you click on these and get the PDFs. We're setting up a couple of pages of web links for people to start navigating around. So I've just put a few in, but there's going to be more and more coming in. So sky maps, Stellarium, space.com, and I've set up a library page of books to read. Now, Barry Cleveland from the library has just given me a list of 17 book recommendations, so I'll put in all of these in here just to give people some ideas of things they can look at and read. So do go have a visit. It's asv.nag.info, and yeah, let me know what you think. I'm always looking for feedback to make it better. And that's it, Steve. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ken. Just a couple of more announcements before we close the session. Last Saturday, the resumption of our Lone Telescope scheme occurred. It's now up and running. Unfortunately, COVID suspended all Lone Telescope efforts. So now that we're into hopefully a more stable period, and those who are waiting, and the waiting list is 12 months. So we apologise for that. All we could do is stack up the members requesting a Lone Telescope. So hang in there, you'll get your scope. It's moving again, and clear skies, hopefully. That brings us to conclusion. Our next monthly meeting is usually, by tradition, our social meeting. Obviously, we can't get together for coffee, tea, and biscuits, can we, Perry? So what we're going to do is have a special just before the star party, the Christmas breakup at LMDSS. Perry's going to do a special talk on 30 years of ASV star parties. So you should see some of us looking quite young. And we can all have a very, very good laugh on that one. So thank you for your attendance, and this is the ASV signing off. Thank you.